I cannot overstate it. I would say he's the most significant whistleblower in modern history.
At that time, it had been 2 years since I was arrested. I felt a sort of kinship with him.
You say surveillance, spying, and everything that goes along with that. And this goes way beyond sort of, James Bond.
My name is Annie Machon, and I used to work in the 1990s as an intelligence officer at MI5, which is where I met my former partner and colleague, David Shaler. And in late 1996, we resigned to go public about a series of concerns we had about incompetence and illegality that was being performed within the British intelligence agencies, up to and including an illegal assassination attempt against the foreign head of state, Colonel Gaddafi.
My name is Jeffrey Sterling, a former CIA officer. I went through proper channels to blow the whistle on a dangerous program targeting the Iranian nuclear program. Information on that operation was leaked, and I was accused of being the leaker. I was subsequently charged with violating the Espionage Act and put on trial. I spent 2.5 years in prison after being found guilty on no evidence.
Thomas Drake, now retired, but former senior executive of the National Security Agency turned whistleblower. And I blew the whistle on the very, very early beginnings of the mass surveillance regime that was put into place right after 9/11. Fraud, waste, and abuse in the billions and billions of dollars, and then 9/11 intelligence failures. My whistleblowing was years prior to his dramatic disclosures, as turned out in 2013.
The case of Thomas Drake represented a turning point in the relationship between the executive branch of government that stands over the intelligence agencies and the actual ordinary Americans who comprise the workers of those agencies.
I did visit him in Moscow. We were actually the first set of Americans, or first Americans that actually met him after he got stranded there.
We both served in the intelligence community, in different capacities. I think one connection is that we both saw something wrong and decided to do something about it. The other connection, I believe, is that before, during, and after our ordeals, we were merely trying to serve our country.
My connection to Snowden is as an advocate campaigner. I've never met the man. I've never been in direct contact with him, but I have hosted events where he has joined us via video link, and he has been resolute and consistent and astonishing in his clarity of thought and his clarity of why he did what he did and what the outcomes he wanted from that were.
National security, is a justification for illegality, and programs like mass surveillance are the means or the vehicle of that illegality.
When ISIS was at its apex in 8-9 years ago, across Europe, there were loads of terrorist attacks, big, horrible ones. And it turned out that because there was mass surveillance, the spies were drowning in all the information they were gathering, and then therefore not doing what they should be doing, which is preemptively stopping these sort of attacks.
It's really a dissolution of what's fundamental to our own individual sovereignty, our ability to remain free, our ability to express ourselves. And yet it's also become a profit center for certain types of companies, but it's also something the government likes to engage in to keep track of people.
Most of us might feel that what we're doing online, because we have to live our lives increasingly online, is going to be gathered up and surveyed. Then that becomes a real problem for how we act, how we inform ourselves, how we communicate. So it becomes the end of a democracy.
It's fundamental to our ability to express ourselves freely in all manner. It's fundamental to our sense of well-being and our creativity, how we show up in the world. And it's how we grow and better ourselves, not just individually, but collectively.
The dilution of privacy, in this country, I believe is unmistakably similar to our history of slavery. When people were not individuals, they were merely property, with no rights. Without privacy, We are not a functioning, contributing, or valuable part of our own society. We are slaves to the whims and attitudes of those in power, the government. The documents and the revelations from Snowden were undeniable proof that privacy was under attack, that privacy wasn't even in consideration for governments, that we were all being victimized by programs like mass surveillance. Without those revelations, that program may still be happening right now.
Well, first of all was PRISM. Secondly, of course, there was Tempora, where we had the UK Foreign Secretary at the time saying he'd signed a warrant to hoover up everything, which included all communications between North America and Europe. And how on earth does a UK Foreign Secretary, even back in the day, sign off on hoovering up everyone's information in the UK?
Critically important, because in the past, as I well knew, where's the proof in terms of actual documents? It's really critical to have proof.
Even though there have been some legal changes as a result of his revelations and subsequent conversation about privacy, I don't think things have changed really all that much. Governments are clever. And as we continue to evolve in this digital age, so will programs like mass surveillance.
The change immediately after the Snowden revelations was interesting, but there was a noticeable Snowden effect where about a third of adults started changing their behavior online, probably to do with pornography, I don't know. But they became much more conscious. I think, though, that it's faded. In terms of what I would like to say for this particular film is do go back and revisit the disclosures that Snowden made.
Whether people wanted to sort of bury their heads in the sand or not, they really couldn't. And I think there just became a much greater level of awareness as to how far governments are willing to go and how far they had gone in this quest for more data. This, as I call it, this hoarding complex. They just can't, they're addicted to the data, can't get enough of it.
If we don't act, and we haven't acted in time, a decade after Snowden came out, we are looking at endemic surveillance everywhere. We already know it exists, and many of us commentate about, China's bad because they have this social credit system and they're watched everywhere they go and everything. Well, actually, that's been happening in the West too. And issues like facial recognition technology coming into the UK and the US, which is used and abused by the police.
The trend lines would indicate we're going to have more surveillance, not less. It'll just become more normalized, and it'll increasingly infect more and more of our lives in the background, to the point where you will have great difficulty going anywhere without being recorded in some fashion, whether it's active, whether it's stored later, whether it's put into some data bank. There's a huge data bank. There's huge amounts of data stored already about every single individual.
I think future surveillance is going to look pretty much the way it does now. Again, as we continue to evolve in this digital age, programs like mass surveillance are going to evolve with us. It's having every aspect of our lives combed through, not for our protection, but for our victimization.
Because Snowden came out 10 years ago as a whistleblower, and those lessons I think have been forgotten, but more interestingly, a new generation has grown up not being aware of them and why these issues are important. They sound a bit old-fashioned, but if we don't have privacy, we cannot have democracy.
I just want to create a world in which we're free to express ourselves to each other, both individually as well as collectively. We're a far better species when we have that ability. I think a whole lot gets cut off, literally, in a surveillance society.
Free future. Certainly had a lot of time to think about that as I was sitting in prison for violating the Espionage Act. A free future to me is one where not having to live under a literal sword of Damocles every day, wondering if my actions are being scrutinized by my government or by someone else who has an interest that is more important to them than my privacy. I think that's what a free future could and should look like.